Good evening, Madam Chair, Siting Board. Kevin Cleary, 31 Cooper Hill Road, Mapleville. I sit as the chairman of the Burrillville Conservation Commission, which is a 7-member, non-for-profit, municipally funded organization formed under Rhode Island general law. Our mission is focused on all aspects of local conservation of natural resources within our community. We focus on a number of educational campaigns aimed at teaching our local residents about conservation of resources, public participation in community environmental events, maintaining designated select public areas, and serving as a technical liaison for the various functions of our local government. The Commission provides technical input to the local offices and municipal boards on land development projects with the goal of ensuring the wealth, health, and safety of the residents we're appointed to serve is maintained. Tonight I'd like to provide you with a little bit of information about our review of the 450 or so page siting proposal or the environmental assessment that the applicant has provided to the board. Correspondence has been provided to the siting board previously on January 29th in regards to the subject application. This correspondence tonight is not a reiteration of that correspondence, but rather a short list item of a number of issues we see citing around the proposal the board has subject before them tonight. The issues below are not all inclusive, but a short indication of the merits of denial of this application as submitted. The prefix to this is the project lacks sufficient information for the impacts of the entire site disturbance proposed. All elements of the project and the impacts of the improvements scheduled, including land, power corridor expansion, wetlands, water quality, air pollution, noise pollution, wastewater, traffic, construction, post-construction are not adequately detailed for rendering of a competent decision by this board. Air pollution is not adequately addressed on a local order of magnitude. Using regional approaches to satisfy air pollution issues is not appropriate for ascertaining the local impacts to air quality immediate to Burrillville, North Smithfield, Gloucester, Thompson, Danielson, Uxbridge, Webster, and Douglas. Measurable expectations of local air pollution and the immediate dispersion of harmful pollutants to the local surrounding of our inhabitants should be quantified and presented in greater detail to the board. Compliance with the Clean Air Act has not been sufficiently demonstrated. Water pollution is not adequately addressed in sufficient detail for the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management to provide the board with a sufficient advisory, which has been requested, to warrant the issuance of any approvals by this board. Stormwater impacts to the 2 local contributing brooks to the Clear River are not satisfactory. Nutrient loadings, sediment retention, peak runoff flows, volume, water quality figures are not satisfactory within the intent of the Clean Water Act. Due to insufficient water pollution evidence, the merits of the project should not be approved by the board at this time. Traffic impacts to state and local roads are not adequately addressed. Long-term impacts are not identified in the proposal, sufficient for Rhode Island DOT to fully quantify the impacts on state highways in our region. Impacts to Greenville, Chepachet, Pasco are not clearly identified sufficiently to understand the local shipping routes associated with the transport of hazardous materials into our community. The U.S. Department of Transportation should have a cursory review on this application, as the transport of hazardous materials over U.S. federal and state highways may warrant such. The application lacks information pertaining to anticipated traffic impacts, trip generations, and details relative to the transport of these hazardous materials to the site. Therefore, the board should not approve this application at this time. Expansion of the existing electrical grid corridor is grossly inaccurate as a component of this project. The existing national grid corridor will see a 3rd set of new high-tension overhead 345 kilovolt power lines added between Wallen Lake Road and Sherman Farm Road. It's a length of over 6 miles. No detail is provided in the siting proposal to ascertain the impacts to woodlands, wetlands, roads, private properties, public lands over the course of this intended route. An advisory opinion from National Grid over the expanded use of the existing corridor should be provided to the board for consideration prior to the execution of this decision. The impacts associated with this part of the project should also be included in the review of Rhode Island DEM, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and Rhode Island DOT. Impacts to private lands, both environmental and economic, over the course of the intended route should be included under the purview of this board. I'll wrap up. No discussion is provided by the applicant over the 6-mile stretch of what impacts will be associated. Processed water to local groundwater is insufficient. The local groundwater aquifer are not addressed in the siting report in sufficient detail. Applicant lacks sufficient detail about the withdrawal, treatment, use, conveyance, and disposal of groundwater proposed for process use. Service process water volumes indicated in the report and the disposal of spent treatment byproduct are not addressed. Treatment of wastewater with expected byproduct characterization for industrial pretreatment compliance is not provided, and the impacts to local groundwater is not detailed to a level where reasonable expectations the existing pollution will be treated and disposed of properly. The siting proposal does not include how the treatment byproduct within the contaminated groundwater will be disposed of. The application does not have any alternate source of processed water identified for the use in this project as a backup. A failure to the groundwater well at Pasco 3A would be detrimental. The intended means of acquiring an alternate water source should be part of this project if it's to be considered. Industrial impacts to the local publicly owned treatment facility should be better detailed for the board's consideration. Fuel sources, not adequately detailed in the siting proposal. I'll try and wrap this up here. Noise impacts, again, not adequately addressed in the siting proposal. In tandem with the AIM project by Spectra, local zoning ordinance compliance will not be met. Critical wildlife habitats and biodiversity impacts associated with the project are not sufficiently detailed to satisfy the approval of this project. A wildlife inventory presented in the environmental assessment is not all-inclusive list of biodiversity at the site. Along the power grid expansion limits or within the proposed utility extensions from Pasco, all fragments of this project are not clearly interlaced with the specific siting of the facility proposed. All aspects should be interlaced. This project should not be fragmented into multiple projects. It's one impact. The information is grossly lacking in the siting proposal for the board to make an informed decision. An advisory opinion from the U.S. EPA and the requirements to complete an environmental impact statement should be remanded for the project. Impacts to our local property are not sufficiently addressed in the siting proposal. Very little detail is provided to make a clear determination on what impacts to local properties, abutting properties, and the community will be. A realization of these community impacts should wholly be quantified for the board to make an informed decision if this siting is appropriate. Financial impacts to local real estate, entire community, and more importantly, the abutting conservation areas are not addressed. Considering the items listed above, the Burrillville Conservation Commission does not support the project's application at this time. Supplemental information from the applicant should be required by the board before a decision is rendered. The Commission does not support the application additionally, as it does not represent conservation of resources, both natural and man-made. The Commission respectfully requests the submission of an environmental impact statement to fully quantify all aspects of the project, including the use of alternate sites for this installation and an alternate energy production type. A finding of no significant impact is invalid for this application by the board in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act and should be enforced by the board as such. The warrants to support the inclusion of the EIS are present, and the environmental assessment that they provided does not adequately address all the issues surrounding this project's scale and magnitude. I'll conclude with the existing site as part of a larger unfragmented corridor of preserved, unimproved forest lands. The Commission would suggest there are more appropriate sites available for the installation of such a facility and would have lesser impacts on regional and local environment, economy, property, and appropriately sited for more conservative use of available resources. Thank you.
Lauren Nodal